to order on May 23rd, 2018. We'll all rise to pledge allegiance to the flag.
To the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I'd like to call the roll.
Commissioner Gieson-Fields?
Here.
Commissioner Jennings? Here. Commissioner Waddy? Here. Chair Kent?
Here. Any export communications need to be disclosed?
No.
I won't bother with the lengthy definition. Moving on to the consent calendar. Are there any items on the consent calendar anyone would like to pull? Audience, anything on the consent calendar? I guess I should explain. The consent calendar are considered routine and items that will be enacted upon by one motion. By approval of the consent calendar, the staff recommendations will be adopted unless otherwise modified by the commission. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a commission member or a member of the audience requests removal of the items from the consent calendar. So nothing from the audience. Back to the commission. I would like to pull Evelyn, which is PA 16-94, Evelyn Avenue. Any others pulled? So
Nope.
Should we make a motion to pass the rest? Then we'll.
Sure.
Okay.
I'll make a motion to approve the Planning and Zoning Commission meeting minutes from May 9th, 2018, as presented.
Second.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So the consent calendar is approved with item to be approved here. The minutes.
The minutes.
That's it. So my only comment on the Evelyn one was the planting plan does not consider our guidelines at all. It's kind of a old standard planting plan where you have a lot of hedges, a lot of water use plants, and we're really trying to get away from the water heavy plants and plants that require a lot of maintenance, like bi-monthly hedging. So that lower plan on the right calls out a lot of plants that are just, they're hedges basically, so you need to just prune them every twice a month. And they're not really adapted to this climate. They're more of a Japanese plant. So I would like that addressed. I'm not sure if we just can make that a comment and you can look at it as a staff review and accept it. That'd be great.
Just to be clear, you would like modification to the specific plantings?
Well, I'd like them to look at the bay-friendly guidelines and plant it basically. That's what our guidelines say. So I'm not going to start giving them specific species, but that doesn't comply. Some of the plants do, just the basic ones don't. All right, with that, I'm willing to approve PA 16-94. Any more comments on that?
No. I mean, I thought the rear yard porch could be lowered if there was an issue from the neighbors, but since there is none, I have no concerns.
I will just say that I appreciate that the applicant considered earlier feedback, and I think this is a much improved project from the last version we saw, and I'm also happy to vote in favor of it.
I did just have one quick question, actually, either for staff or the applicant. It indicates that the windows are wood clad, but not what type of cladding will be used. Does staff know what kind of cladding is proposed, or the applicant?
We'll defer that one to the applicant.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, first of all, I'm the architect. I like the idea of the drought-friendly plants. I should have made a little more careful thought consideration on that, but we can definitely work with the planning staff and on the condition of that the plants be more drought tolerant. As far as the windows, aluminum clad wood, and I believe we're going to try to recess them back to provide more shadow on the wall front. Yeah.
With that, I have no additional comments. That's what I was hoping they would be.
Thank you. All right, so with that, would somebody make a motion to approve?
I'll make a motion, I guess. I'll make a motion to approve planning application 16-094, design review and conditional use permit for a two-level addition at 1131 Evelyn, with the condition that the applicant work with staff to revise the landscape plan to reflect our guidelines, which reference the Bay Area guidelines for landscape and
Friendly
planting.
guidelines.
Bay Area friendly guidelines. Bay
Friendly
guidelines.
Which I think they changed. Something like that.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
The motion passes. The application is approved. Moving on to item 7. Oh, sorry, it's item 6.
The appeal thing.
Oh, yeah, thank you. So there's still, don't take your story polls down, this item has a 14-day appeal period, which a member of the public could appeal it to city council, to us.
To the city, which
To the city, right. Okay, right, thank you. Thank you. Moving on to item 6, public comment. For persons desiring to address the commission on items that are not on the agenda, please note that each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. The Brown Act limits the commission ability to take and/or discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, such items are normally referred to staff for comment or to a future agenda. Is there anyone that would like to address the commission?
Yes, we do have one speaker card for public comment.
Great.
Jeremiah.
Come forward.
Hi, good evening, Planning and Zoning Commission. It's really great to be here. I'd like to forward these to you. I guess I should do this. Maybe you guys could scan those and then give them to Ann, and I'll pick them up, please. Those are my only copies, I'm sorry. Just to let you know, I've been working on school zones. I have emails to Jerry Brown dated back, I believe, 2011. And I graduated Albany High School in 2001, and I'm trying to be a good citizen of my community, a productive citizen. And I noticed a long time ago that in our municipal code book, we don't have school zones. And so right now, the slowest speed in Albany around our schools is 25. We have no such thing as a reduced speed. There's no such thing as 15 miles an hour. And I've suggested to City Council for about 7 or 8 years now that if all we need to do is simply get the word school zone in our municipal code book somewhere, and Jerry Brown said that he could technically give us the state grant, the state school zone grant, which is funds 10 paid crossing guards, and it adds $100,000 to the budget to repaint the crosswalks, to maybe put push-button LED lights and things like that, and put up more signs. And in the past years, I've been very persistent, coming to as many city council meetings as possible. And the city council meeting on Monday, it was the greatest city council meeting ever. We're talking about the crossing guard situation and how to fund them. And if we add school zones to our municipal code book, then we can have double fine zones during school hours. And with those double fines, the money we accumulate for the double fine could go toward the crossing guard budget, the crossing guard program. So that's how we could add money to that and make that possible. Instead of taking money from the soda tax or whatever we got to do. Right now, we only have 5 crossing guards. We're supposed to have 6, okay? And 1 crossing guard retired in December, so right now we're short 1 on Jackson and Solano. So we have no crossing guard at the bottom of Albany Hill where cars are coming down. It's a very dangerous intersection. So we only have 5 right now, and we're supposed to have 6. So there either should be some money left over in the crossing guard fund, the half of her year, but that's not really the issue. Is we've got to get school zones in our municipal code book, and that means it has to be gone through the planning and zoning. I've tried to have it referred from city council to you guys. The past 3 mayors have agreed with me that one of the mayors said we could make a measure. I've gathered about 800 signatures I have with the city clerk right now from citizens in Albany, 800 signatures that parents would like to add school zones, and we could make a measure. So I left my contact information, and I'll be coming to more of these meetings since they're twice a month, and I apologize I haven't been to one before. So let's add school zones, please and thank you.
Thank you. Any more?
No more public comment cards.
Okay, I'll close public comment. Move on to item 7, discussions and possible actions on matters related to the following items. 7-1, planning application 18-034, temporary use permit of Night Nation Run at Golden Gate Fields. Would you like to explain that one?
Yes. So before you tonight is a one-time only request in the form of a temporary use permit to have a run at Golden Gate Fields, Night Nation Run. This would be in October this fall. October 6th is the anticipated date for this event. So it will be a 2.5K fun run at Golden Gate Fields. The event will be on October 6th from 5 p.m. to 10:30. The event will be held at the northwest corner of the Golden Gate Fields property, close to the Turf Club parking lot. As part of the application submittal material, the applicant indicated that they expect approximately 5,000 attendees. And a little over 1,600 cars to be on site. All of the activities associated with the event will be fully contained on the Golden Gate Fields property. And this is a run that is done elsewhere in the country. It's a national event, so if this were to be approved, this would be the event for the Bay Area. The event requires advanced ticket purchases, and only ticketed attendees are allowed to be admitted. There is beer and wine offered on site for consumption, and that is encompassed as part of Golden Gate Fields ABC permitting. So that's not something that the city would look at. It's under their ABC license. There's also a DJ stage, and all of the event-related parking will be contained on site. It's anticipated that attendees would access the property from Gilman Street, so they'd actually exit Interstate 80 in Berkeley and then enter through the Gilman entrance. Just to give you kind of a big picture snapshot, the general plan has designated the Golden Gate Fields property for commercial recreation land use. It also has a waterfront zoning designation. The waterfront zoning district does allow for commercial recreation and entertainment uses with a use permit. We have a definition within the code, but other activities, it's specified within the code, golf, tennis, swimming, or other commercial or spectator participatory activities may also be permitted depending on the Planning Commission determination. So temporary use permits are contained in section 2020-090 of the Municipal Code. Just to reiterate, this is a one-time only event. If this were to become a regular event, a master use permit would be required for the property. With respect to findings, the temporary use permit findings actually default to the conditional use permit findings, so that's what we've provided to you in your staff report. And then just to reiterate, if this was to become a regular thing, we would have to do a more comprehensive use permit. With that, we've included draft findings in the staff report. To reiterate, the parking is all contained on site. We haven't received any correspondence in regards to this application request. It's categorically exempt pursuant to section 15323, normal operations and facilities for public gatherings as part of CEQA. And with that, we're recommending approval of the project. The applicants had actually worked pretty extensively with both police and fire here to make sure that their emergency plans and circulation plans were all satisfactory to their expectations. And they will also have some law enforcement staff on site as part of the event.
Any questions from staff?
Yeah, I have a couple. I guess my usual question is, I'm just curious who was notified of this, since we haven't had any.
So we, pursuant to Government Code Section 65090, we do the 300-foot mailer. But as you can conclude, Golden Gate Fields doesn't have much in the way of surrounding neighbors. We also post it in 3 places and do our posting online.
Which is what I suspected. That's why I just wanted to make sure, because we always hear that about the Golden Gate projects, that we haven't had any comments, but obviously nobody's really notified. My only other question is, in the map of the night run, I guess it appears that the actual path for the map goes off of that image that they gave us for the map. And so I wanted to know what the actual full route was of it.
Yeah. I can bring that exhibit up, and I'll also let the applicant elaborate since they prepared the exhibits.
Sure, thanks for considering our event. I'm Frank Brown, I'm one of the co-owners of Night Nation Run. The actual run is a 2-loop option. It's 2.5K, so people have the option to complete a 5K. It doesn't look like on there it shows the full route, but it uses the Buchanan extension and then runs actually onto the Golden Gate Fields track and through their property there.
Okay, so it goes through like a side gate?
Yeah, it goes through a side gate and through the back stretch of Golden Gate Field.
Okay.
So it runs, it goes north over the parking lot. You say Buchanan Extension, you made that over past the chain link fence that separates the parking from the site?
Yes.
Down there?
Yes.
It cuts into us.
Sorry, what is the orientation of this? North is not up, is it? I'm like super
North.
confused.
That's, east.
East would be the top part of the rendering.
That's a little-
So this is north,
Okay,
that's west.
okay, thank you. Oh, yeah, go for it. And do you have a map that shows the whole course, or
Are you able to maybe pull up
or can we,
Google map, maybe?
So, so it's going to run down Buchanan Extension because there's no sidewalk there to run on. So it'll just be coming right down when everybody's be accessing the park during the day. Won't it be oh no, it's at night.
It's
That's
at
right,
night.
It's a night run.
Yeah, so it'll be separated by barricade. There's a small section there, yeah, you'll see it, see it there, where they run and then turn right to go towards the field. But there's actually enough separation there.
Oh, okay, that's not a problem. I thought you were saying it runs out onto the park, the Albany Park access point. Does it? That doesn't seem, I'm not following this exactly. So the runners run down the green, then they turn east there, or turn right, and then they run to the field.
Right, yeah, you're correct, east towards the infield of Golden Gate Fields.
They just run onto the field. And they just run around the field.
Yeah, and then they come back around out an exit gate on I guess that's the south end, and then back up towards this festival space that we've created there.
So it's all contained within the property?
Yes.
Oh, right. It's no conflict.
Yeah, the entire event will be contained within the property.
Any more questions?
yeah, so where is the parking area for the event in relation to the route?
So the parking area is all north,
Okay,
and that's Golden Gate Field's normal main park.
right, okay.
Ingress and egress and run.
Well, yeah, so the ingress and egress just for pedestrians, or, so they're parking north of there and then walking in, or,
Yes.
okay.
We have we were advised to use Gilman as the main ingress and egress for vehicle traffic. Obviously Buchanan is much closer to where the actual lot is, so we're open to either.
My concern was more about that you would be inhibiting the use of the park somehow, but it doesn't seem like that's the case at all.
Or as an alternative, we could just open Buchanan up on egress after the event to alleviate traffic.
Is that what they do on race days? Do you know?
Yeah, they use both on race days.
both entrances are used. This is Barnham and General Manager at Golden Gate Fields, if I can answer any questions.
Thanks.
Okay, thank you. So, Ann, why was the Gilman exit pushed over the Buchanan entrance? Why was the?
Don't say because it's in Berkeley.
No, it's not that. You know, in working with the police department on this, I think there was a real desire to avoid sort of any pedestrian vehicle conflict, and the thinking was that if vehicles are coming in from the south and the event is to the north, that minimizes that conflict.
No, I was just looking at the conflict here, where the run is going up and down I'm not sure what that street is called, Frontage Road or something. And you have the vehicles too, but, I mean, I'm not gonna double guess police if they looked at this and that's their route.
Yeah, I mean, there will be very minimal vehicle traffic when the actual run takes place, because most of the cars and people will be there at that point. I know Golden Gate, I believe, needs to keep that access open for the off-track people that you have coming in, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So that's one of the other reasons that we would need to have the Gilman Street exit entrance open anyway.
Okay.
Should we have him do a formal presentation if you want?
Well, if we have questions, let's put it first.
Because we haven't really let him present.
We just
We've been
badger him
asking for
questions.
clarification.
Well, I guess, could you inform us what a little bit more about the project? Could you do a little presentation on the project?
About the run, you said?
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so Night Nation Run it's an all-ages 5K that takes place at night and revolves around music. We're a partner with Stand Up to Cancer. So over the last 3 years, we've generated over $500,000 in funds that have gone directly to Stand Up to Cancer for innovative cancer research. It's, like I said, it's an all-ages event that we've put on 80-plus times now since 2014, not only in the U.S. and Canada, but also in Australia, Japan. We've turned this event into something that's great for the community, and in most of the cities that we've been to, we've never been to a venue where we weren't asked to come back. We just completed our largest event of the year in Chicago at Soldier Field, which is a third year in a row that we've been there. And we'd love to make this event here at Golden Gate Fields the same type of annual event. We did hold actually a Bay Area event earlier this year in San Jose at the San Jose Earthquakes Stadium there. And we'd really like to find a North Bay Area location as well, like I said, and make this an annual event.
Do you usually hold the events at athletic stadiums and similar venues?
Typically, we try to. Places like this, we've also, San Diego is my hometown, and we do it at the Del Mar Fairgrounds at the horse rake track there. It helps to, because it's a nighttime event, to find a athletic facility where we can typically keep the entire event contained on a property and not have to interrupt traffic and things like that at night on a Saturday night, because that becomes much more difficult. So our go-to has been to be at athletic venues or racetracks. Horse racetracks have worked out very well for us.
It's interesting, because I was wondering why the racetrack doesn't do more fun runs. I never saw a fun run there before, and then all of a sudden this came up.
Well, hopefully we'll start a trend.
Exactly. But that's, any more questions for the applicant?
Nope.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Any comments?
Public comment.
Oh, yes, sorry. I want to, any from the public would like to speak on this subject?
Evening, Commissioners. Robert Chasty, citizen of Albany. I think this is a good use for Golden Gate Fields. It meets all of the zoning requirements. It's recreational, it's waterfront, doesn't interfere, and it fits within the kinds of facilities they have without impacting the community. I think that if Golden Gate Fields could, more things like this would help.
Thank you. So now, any more public comment, or anyone like to speak? Close public comment, bring it back to the commission. Comments from the commissioners?
I mean, I just have some general comments. I think I could support the project because it's a temporary event that won't have any sort of permanent damage to the area. I also just like the idea of the event. I think it's great. I support its cause. And also, I guess in general, I would just, in terms of my personal opinion, I would say that I like the fact that they're relying on the Gilman Avenue entrance, because I think it decreases the possibility of their traffic sort of overflowing into the public area of the Buchanan Street parking and the access to the bulb. So, so I like that in the sense of pulling it over towards the Gilman area, so that hopefully it won't have negative impacts on that area as much as possible. And so, yeah, I mean, I'm open to supporting the project.
Great. I guess the only thing I would have to add in addition to that is I do really like the idea of being able to sort of reuse Golden Gate Fields when it's not race season or a race day, and bring a diversity of other outdoor activity uses for folks in the area. So I think it's a great temporary use here, and I would very much support the project.
I agree with all that, nothing to add.
I agree with it also, but I was thinking that it might be too much pressure on Gilman. I mean, it's an awkward intersection as it is, and maybe it should be open up Buchanan so that they access from both ways. It seems kind of bottlenecked, but again, I'm not going to double guess the police department in this one. So anyone want to make a motion to approve?
Sure. I will move to approve planning application 18034, temporary use permit.
All in favor, say aye.
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 The motion passes. There is an appeal period for 14 days, so I don't think you have any story polls up, but that's the status. So congratulations. Good job.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving on to planning application 18-32, design review conditional use permit for a second-story apartment at 1309 Solano Avenue. Ann, would you like to do a presentation?
Yes, give you a little overview of what's going on here. You have basically two entitlements before you as part of this project, design review and a use permit, to legalize two second-story apartments at 1309 Solano. The subject site is just under 3,000 square feet, and there's an existing 4,500 square foot mixed-use building that was built in 1941. The building was originally constructed as a laundry on the ground floor, and there was a single apartment on that second floor. It was substantially added to in 1962, which included a family room and a bedroom. And by the 1980s, that space was converted to professional offices with building permits. And to put a more contemporary lens on this, if any of you have been to Kim's Cafe on Solano, that's the building in question. So this is the street view. Kim's is on the lower level along with the hair salon, and these are the upstairs apartments. The current owner purchased the property in June 1998 and filed an application with the Community Development Department on June 1st, 1999 to convert the upstairs space to 2 apartment units. At that time, the plans were reviewed by the fire department and required a 1-hour fire separation between the commercial and residential occupancies, as well as a fire sprinkler system. The application subsequently became inactive and was withdrawn from review. On a routine fire inspection last year, the fire inspector went out to inspect the property and identified that, in fact, there were apartments in the upstairs that were both occupied and rented. And as part of his inspection, there were several fire prevention aspects that were not installed, including smoke detectors, exit lighting, fire alarms, the fire sprinklers, and a secondary means of egress from those units. The Community Development Department, as a result of that, initiated a code enforcement case and met with the owner in March of 2017, which further identified those unsafe conditions. We sent a letter to the property owner in May requesting that he engage in the services of a licensed architect to identify solutions to remedy the lack of fire egress. So the plans that are before you tonight are prepared by a local licensed architect. We've had several meetings to identify what the proper solutions are for this particular case. So in order to do this, both design review is required as well as a use permit. The use permit is required for parking because the property has no off-street parking. There's also some minor exterior changes, which is why there's a design review request. And as part of this application, the applicant is proposing fully code-compliant egress, fire sprinklers, and the fire separation for the building. So within the units, there are interior modifications that are proposed to the existing partitions, which will create two functional two-bedroom apartments. There's going to be fire-rated walls between those two units, fire-rated entry doors, as well as the automatic fire sprinkler system. So we would effectively legalize both units from a fire safety as well as a zoning code perspective. And this is a section to give you a little more detail on what that looks like. So you would have the two units upstairs with the 1 hour wall separating the spaces. And the elevations that are proposed to change are on the back where the secondary means of egress would be required. So currently, there is not a man door. This is proposed as part of that would provide a safe escape, and there is a landing that would be proposed for the roof, as well as these slider windows that exceed the 24-inch minimum for escape in the event of a fire. As I mentioned before, there are no off-street parking spaces on the subject site. Pursuant to the city's municipal code, 1 parking space is required per dwelling unit for a residential mixed-use project. So in this case, that would result in 2 off-street parking spaces. As part of your report, we've included draft findings to waive the off-street parking. And just to remind the commission, when we updated the parking regulations last year, we included a provision in part specifically to address this type of request where there may be pre-existing conditions that preclude on-site parking, and it gives the applicant a path forward. We get the ability to count new housing units as part of our regional housing needs allocation, and it allows them to utilize the space in an effective and safe way. And just to refresh your memory, that new section is 2028-040A7 that allows through the use permit process to waive the parking. We haven't received any correspondence in regards to the project proposal. The project is categorically exempt pursuant to Section 15303 of CEQA, which is new construction or conversion of small structures. And with that, we're recommending approval of the proposed project subject to the findings and conditions. And I know the project architect and the applicant's attorney are here this evening to address the commission.
So did you say are here?
Yeah, they're
Okay. Oh, great.
second row.
Great.
Any questions of staff?
So just to confirm, the only aspect of design review that we're looking at is about that rear
The rear
elevation?
windows.
Okay. And is that's not visible from any public street, is it? It's just,
No, I don't even think from behind there would be visibility because it abuts residential uses.
okay. And what size are the units? Roughly?
I'll defer that to the architect.
Sure. Also, have they been continuously occupied while this code enforcement is pending, or were they required to vacate?
We didn't go through any formal vacation request. To my knowledge, the property owner has been renting out those apartments in the time since these conditions were identified.
Mm-hmm.
I did have one sort of follow-up question to that. It looks like the windows on the front facade were replaced at some time after 2008. Were those done, replaced with permits or without?
My review of Laserfish, I don't recall seeing a permit for those windows. Maybe the architect can verify that, but I didn't find anything on. Oh, okay.
It looks like sometime after 2008 per Google Street View, so.
So when the applicant originally was looking into doing a planning permit in 99, I think, and then they never followed up on it. It turns out they did some of the improvements, maybe not to any plan. What, are they fined for that, or what's the repercussions of it?
We don't really have a formal fine structure process, and this was only caught last year. We tried to work with the applicant to bring this to a conclusion. We do have our code enforcement counsel who's involved, but we didn't do anything in the way of formal consequences, financial or otherwise.
It seems like it's a much, you know, if you don't just do it without going through the process, you save all that money from planning permit fees, and then there's no repercussion except if you actually might get found out, and then you have to go through the process. It's a little odd. And meanwhile, those people are living in there in kind of a potentially hazardous condition. All right, can we have the applicant? Any more questions of staff? Applicant, please, please come up.
Good evening. My name's Andrew Woolman, so I'm the architect for the project. And just to answer the questions, I don't have the exact square footage of the units here with me today, but they're approximately 900 and 700 and something square feet by looking at the plans. I haven't looked at the plans in several weeks, so but I believe that's about the size of it. And they're both two-bedroom apartments. So the project in general, as you've heard, is not so much for me an architectural project as it is a life safety project. And so we've taken the problem of this building, which had a history of residential use way back when it was built originally. It was used as it had apartments upstairs, and at some point it was converted to office use. And then there was an attempt in 1999 to turn it back to residential use, which was aborted. And now we're at this juncture where they want to go ahead and legalize it as residential again. So we're taking this existing building and looking how to bring it to current fire codes and current safety codes. So that's what we're doing primarily. It's about putting in fire separation, sprinklering the entire building, both commercial and residential, interlinked and monitored. So that the building overall is safer for all occupants and for the neighbors. So it's overall a great improvement to the building. Just as a matter of clarification, it's a 2-unit residential, so it doesn't require a second means of egress. The exiting that we're proposing through the windows, et cetera, they're escape windows, so that it's not a full second means of egress as you may see in an office building or some such, or in a large apartment building. So we're upgrading the primary stairs to the front of the building and hallway as fire contained and separated from the units. And then beyond that, what we're doing is we're finding pathways from the escape windows to a place where people can be rescued or can leap, as the code allows, from the second floor to the ground. So that's basically what my involvement has been and what we're trying to achieve with the project.
Thank you.
Questions?
Any questions? Leo?
Yeah, I guess I have a couple questions. So I noticed in the plans and the building section, the one that's behind you, it looks like you're providing sort of a little runway, if you will, of a planked platform for them to. Is there any? I guess I'm curious why you chose to have it that width rather than have it, up at the door threshold level where it could be somewhat wider.
I think we're basically trying to not to disrupt the roof more than we need to, and the higher it gets, the harder it is to clean. The bigger it gets, the harder it is to clean and maintain the roof and those kind of things. So we're trying to provide, assuming that people have climbed out a window to get here, that they're able-bodied and they're getting to a place where they can then be rescued. It's not like a hallway. So it was a balance of considerations, just to provide. I think we were trying to provide 2 feet, surface to walk on. Enough to get you there, basically.
Okay. And then, Sorry, do you mind? And then just clarify, I just want to make sure I understand correctly, on the right side of that section elevation, the existing window is going to be basically kind of moved over to the left, and then you're putting in that second smaller window?
Right.
And I'm just curious the configuration seems a little odd looking at it from the exterior. Is it going to be kind of,
It's odd.
that's just what it has to be, basically?
It's balancing using existing window rather than buying a new one. It's some budgetary, the existing window doesn't comply as an escape window because it's too high off the floor.
Okay.
So it's, this back elevation isn't intended to be terribly artistic. It's not seen from anywhere. It was really trying to be more about getting light into the units and providing the egress.
Okay. Okay.
So yeah, it's odd. I agree.
Those are my only questions.
Thank you. Any questions?
I'm not sure if they're questions or comments.
Okay, we'll wait for the comments. The one question I had is, you have a railing around the back to protect people from falling out. I guess it's the parapet of the roof, and then you put a little railing on top of it. I guess that when you get to the exit ladder, you climb over the parapet and down? Is that how?
Yes.
Okay. Okay, that's all my only question. Thank you.
Oh, I'm sorry. I have one more question for you. And this might just be sort of a technical error, but I noticed in, I believe, your proposed plans, and correct me if I'm wrong, it looks like you're indicating the firewall with that dashed line separating the units. If we're able to pull up, I think it's sheet A1. And so if we go to the upper floor, I guess it's just, I'm sorry, the lower floor plan. It looks like a couple walls are possibly missing the graphic indicator for the fire separation wall. So like specifically the wall between the office and the kitchen doesn't show the dashed line.
Okay, I understand.
And same with the bathrooms there. And so I just wanted to make sure I'm.
I understand, I believe your concern, but those lines are shown as being 1 hour construction because they're structural walls, not because they're separating anything on the first floor. It's because they're supporting a floor system that is a separation between the two floors.
Okay.
So they're protected to protect themselves structurally, not to separate spaces.
Okay, okay. And so then am I correct to assume then that the wall that separates those different user spaces, such as the salon, from the residential area is going to be fire rated as a fire separation wall between the units as part of the upgrade?
I'm not sure I understand the question. On the first floor, we've got 2 commercial uses, so they're not required to be separated from each other.
Okay, so.
On the second floor, we have 2 residential units, which are required to be separated from each other.
Okay.
And from their exit enclosure, the hallway and the stairs. And I believe there's a storage room upstairs too that is also required to be separated from the residential units and is.
Okay.
Above and beyond that, we have a horizontal separation between the commercial use on the ground floor and the residential use on the second floor. So there's separations going on everywhere, but none on the first floor.
Okay. Okay, great. That clarifies that for me.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any comments from the public? Open it up. Nope. All right, then we'll bring the conversation back to the commission. Would like to make any comments?
Sure, I'll start. I mean, generally speaking, I'd be supportive of legalizing the 2 apartments. I certainly wouldn't be in support of making them remove the 2 apartments, especially since it sounds like they're occupied units. I think that's important to keep that, both the people living in those units housed, as well as the additional sort of official 2 new units onto the city's housing stock for RENA goal purposes. So I'm very supportive of that, as well as waiving the parking again with it being an existing structure, especially on Solano. I don't think it would be appropriate here to mandate new curb cuts or off-street parking to be provided. I suppose as it relates to the design review component, I would be supportive of adding a condition of approval that they replace the windows that appear to have been installed without benefit of permit as part of this approval, especially given the history of doing first and seeking approval later. I think it's appropriate to sort of clean all aspects of the permitting up on this property at this moment. And I would defer to staff to be working through that to make sure they get the types of windows they need for egress purposes. I'm not sure exactly, I'd prefer typically not to have sliders on front facades, but I don't know if that's in.
Yeah, no, I think the more specific we can be, the better. Because one thing I will point out is that we actually have a policy as part of our design guidelines and just as a general matter of practice where we don't allow the faux divided lights, and those are the windows that are on the front facade.
Precisely. So, I mean, what I would encourage, unless not allowed, I suppose, by fire code, would be to have those as either picture windows or casement windows, wood or aluminum clad wood windows, for a material, and either no grills or sort of an architectural 3D simulated light with spacer bars between, or a true divided light. So with the addition of that, and the other comment I had on a similar note is it looks like right now there was a previous sign that was on that upper level between the two windows, and it looks like they just covered it up, which seems like a pretty sloppy solution for no longer needing that sign. There's like a brown, just if you go to the front facade, there's that brown box between the two windows, and if you go back in history, that was it looks like a directly illuminated sign. So I think that should be cleaned up and patched with stucco to match, or whatever the underlying material is of the upper floor as part of that. So with those conditions factored in, I would be very supportive of the remainder of the requests before us.
So I similarly would support the legalization of the existing units, and I don't think it serves any important public interest to shut them down, certainly, or to make anyone move out, and would support the CUP for a parking waiver with the existing building. I guess when I was saying I wasn't sure if mine were comments or questions, I am concerned that if this is a situation where there are tenants living there who are going to have to move out to accommodate the renovations, given that this is in a code enforcement context, I would like to see the city require some kind of compensation for tenants if they are required to move out and find other housing. So I'm not sure exactly what that looks like, and I don't know if the applicant's attorney wants to address that, but without knowing all the facts, I'm not exactly sure what would be appropriate here, but I would not want the tenants who are living here to have to bear the burden of their landlord having not followed the rules. So that would be an important consideration for me. But with that comment, I'm prepared to approve this.
I mean, I'll just piggyback on what you said, and I wholeheartedly agree with your sentiment, Commissioner Jennings, and I'll just anecdotally throw out that I know in my personal experience, professional experience, we've had projects where we've had to do fire upgrades to fire separation walls while the condominium units are being habited, and typically it can be done, and I think a lot of it usually ends up being them just simply putting in specific fire-rated sealants at the joints and plugging up openings in the walls and maybe putting on another layer of sheetrock, which are things that typically can be done without too much disturbance to the occupants. So hopefully that will be the case with this. But again, I agree with what the other commissioners said. I support keeping the residential units, and I agree with Commissioner Waddy's comments about the aesthetics of the front, specifically the windows too. I think, yeah, and I think your recommendation of the wood clad or something just non-vinyl windows, I think would be my, my recommendation.
Yeah, thank you for the comments, a lot of good suggestions there. And I agree with everyone's comments. I really don't have much to add. I think the design as stated was just to make the place safer, and it seems to do that. The only aesthetic, and I think the aesthetic comments regarding the front facade are very good. I'd like to see those put in place too. So with that, I have no issue with accepting this with not requiring, to allowing this, not require that extra parking spot. So I would say somebody make a motion to approve both the use permit and the
Design review.
design review.
Sure, I'll make a motion to approve the planning application 18032, design review and conditional use permit for 1309 Solano.
All in favor, say aye.
Sorry,
Just to
With
clear
the
it.
conditions.
conditions
Yes.
that were recommended by Commissioner Waddy, and
Yeah.
was there something else
Which was the
regarding the
airing
front?
the
Windows and
front
sign.
window, the
I can
remnant
repeat what I
sign.
have written down. The condition would require the applicant to replace the 2 front windows with a building permit. Picture or casement window would be okay. No faux divided light would be permitted. 3D simulated light would be okay, or just a plain picture window. Aluminum clad or wood, non-vinyl materials. And also to remove the sign on the front facade and do stucco patchwork.
And if they do need to be relocated during construction,
And I don't know that we can impose that as a condition, but I wanted to make that comment, and
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure without the
Right.
city attorney present if we can include that, but I
we
think
just, yeah, we can say desires.
should we encourage?
All the time.
encourage, there you go.
You have to come up to the mic, please.
So we can hear. Good, okay. good.
Okay. So with those conditions that we just went over, I move to approve the planning application.
I'll second that motion.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Motion passes. There's a 14-day appeal period.
Thank you.
Moving on to the agenda, we have proposed zoning code amendment to section 20-40-040, density bonus of the Albany Municipal Code. We are to review and actually make a motion tonight.
Yeah, so you reviewed this once before and adopted a resolution of intention. This would be your formal action with a recommendation to the city council to formally amend the zoning code.
Okay. We have a presentation, Jeannie? Thank you.
Good evening, Chair and members of the commission. Yes, so as Ann said, you may recall we met in March and had a study session on this item, but tonight you are being asked to take action and make a recommendation to the council for these amendments. So just to recap, the state density bonus law provides an opportunity for developers to build additional units above base density in exchange for providing on-site affordable housing or senior housing. So in 2016, the state legislature made a number of changes to encourage housing production and make implementation of the law easier. So these are the key changes to the ordinance. In your packet, in attachment 5, the amendments are shown as red lines. The key changes since you saw it last time are that it's been reviewed by the city attorney, and we just made some minor tweaks. So just to briefly go through some of the key amendments, the city can require applicants to provide reasonable documentation stating why they qualify for a density bonus, but they can't require additional developers to prepare additional reports. Local governments can only deny a requested incentive or concession if it does not result in identifiable and actual cost reductions. So it puts a heavier burden of proof on the city. The amendments also acknowledge that eligible projects can elect to obtain flexibility in the standards, but they don't have to take advantage of the actual density bonus. The The amendments distinguish between waivers, which are generally relief from physical development standards, from incentives and concessions, which are other relief from standards that result in identifiable cost reductions. The amendments identify procedures and timeline for processing a density bonus application, and those are also attached in your packet. They clarify that a request for a parking reduction does not count towards the incentives and concessions that a project may be eligible for. The amendments expand application of the law to developments for transitional foster youth, for disabled veterans, and for homeless persons at very low income levels. And lastly, the amendments allow specific parking ratios for projects located near transit. So again, the action and staff recommendation are to approve Resolution 2018-02, recommending that the City Council amend the density bonus section of the Municipal Code.
Thank you. Any comments of?
I have no questions, comments.
I have a couple comments, maybe questions. I'm having trouble with the distinction tonight, I guess. So I guess the most substantive question I have relates to, and thank you, by the way, I thought this was all very clearly presented, and you know, everything makes sense why we're doing it, and what it is we're doing. But my one question relates to the provisions about inclusion of a child care facility. So section 5, or I guess it's C5, says, and this is not new language, it's existing, but it says that the city will grant either an additional density bonus or an additional concession or incentive, subject to certain terms and conditions. And then in the table later on, table H2, it indicates that for a child care facility, one incentive or concession may be granted in lieu of square foot bonus if it contributes to economic feasibility of construction of child care facility. And so those seem to be, like, the table to me seems like it is summarizing what's in the text, but I'm having trouble lining up those two, like the narrative text provision and the language in the table. Because there seems to be a difference between will and may, and there seems to be, in one case, a suggestion that it's the applicant's election, whether you get the density or, you know, the square footage bonus or a different concession. And in the other case, it seems to be a presumption that it will be square footage rather than something else. So I don't know what the right answer is, and I don't know if this is coming straight from the state law or not. But I think if we can clarify what the intent is and make sure those are consistent, that was my biggest comment. The other one, I guess, also just looking at table H2, regarding the incentives and concessions, I know that the senior, the categories for senior and land donation previously said not applicable, and now they're crossed out. And it wasn't clear to me whether that means that there are no incentives or concessions available for those kinds of projects, or if it means something else.
So with respect to the, sorry, did you have any?
Oh, no, go ahead, please.
So with respect to the first item, I think I need to go back and look at state law and see which one is correct, and if we can make that change before we go to bring the ordinance to the council, we'll do it then. The second one we removed just because it was, I believe that there is no, you're right that this is a summary of the applicability of incentives, concessions in state law, and it's not spelled out the same way because the senior housing is not, does not need to be affordable under state density bonus law. And so I think that's why it's separate from the lower versus very low categories. So you can get a density bonus for senior housing that's not affordable.
Right. And is it
And
correct
so-
that there are, so if it's not affordable, you can't get additional incentives?
Right, and
The
so
density bonus, okay,
I think previously it just said not applicable, and we just decided to clean it up and take it out.
remove it, okay. Is that all? I guess one other, this is pretty minor, but in C1, and again in C3, actually I guess it's in C2 as well. So the way that it's worded right now says that there can be a bonus of no more than whatever the percentage is, 35 or 20. And this may just be my stylistic thing, but it seemed like it would be more appropriate if it said up to. Somehow, no more than sounds like it's limiting and sounds like it suggests that it's discretionary whether you get it at all. And I know that's not the intent, and that's not what the table below says, but it's just a suggestion that perhaps you flip that language around to change the way it comes across.
Okay.
And then my other like super duper nitpicky comment is just that on the draft resolution, the heading says a recommendation to the city council to amending. So if we could just delete the to for the final version, that would be great. And now I'll stop. Thank you.
I'm glad you thoroughly looked at it.
Sure. I had a quick question for staff. On the red line version of the document under D1A, it notes a reduction in site development standards or a modification of zoning code requirements or architectural design requirements. I guess my question is that actually the allowance for folks to waive or modify architectural design requirements as one of their concessions or incentives? Is that specifically called out in state law, or is that sort of our local version of established concessions and incentives?
I don't think that's called out in state law, so this is an idea that applies here. So something different than a physical standard that would be subject to a waiver. This might be something about the encroachment of an overhang into a setback, something like that. Just trying to think of something off the top of my head.
Got it. I guess my only thought on that is I do have some concern about the way it's worded and having that lead to folks using really poor quality exterior materials and trying to demonstrate that, it's provides some cost savings or it's an incentive to not have to provide more expensive, well-detailed materials. And I certainly wouldn't want us to see that on our density bonus projects that are likely already going to be larger in size and scale, that I think we should still have a high standard for the architectural design. I certainly would be amenable to things like, a deeper, canopy at the roof level or things like that that are, maybe deviations from numeric standards that we still think are of a strong architectural design. But I wouldn't want to see people putting up, T111 siding and vinyl windows in these large projects. So that's my only comment that I have on this. Other than that, I'm supportive of it as drafted.
Sorry, do you mind if I say something?
Yeah, I don't mind.
I don't want to interrupt the chair. No, I'm glad Commissioner Waddy caught that, and I think that is a good thing to sort of possibly be revised, just because I think the wording kind of could possibly open it up for a broad sort of applicant interpretation and or use to sort of circumvent our ability to review it. So yeah, I think that's something that definitely should be reconsidered in terms of its wording.
Yeah, thank you for that. That was a good one. I didn't see that. But one thing I did notice, I was trying to dig up where I pulled it out from. But we have our list of project submittal checklist. And I know the part of the ordinance is to require a standard process. But this checklist is very much a residential checklist. It doesn't really apply for the large multi-family housing projects. And if you did, you'd need things like perspectives and renderings of the plan, which aren't called for. In addition, you have a comment there that says the department may, staff may have additional application requirements. Is that okay to say if you need a standard process that all of a sudden have a statement like that in there? And the other one was, I think stormwater is not addressed because mostly residential is too small to qualify, but when you get to bigger projects, you need a stormwater plan.
So part of this was trying to retain some flexibility as opposed to putting the submittal requirements in the ordinance where from time to time staff may want to update them and, maybe they adopt it by resolution or, it's available on the city's website. So you're right that these submittal requirements are fairly general and they are more directed towards single family because that's most of the applications that the city receives. So we could certainly add things like perspectives in addition to the elevations and sections. The stormwater requirements would be triggered for any project that has C3.
Right, so it
that
may not
triggers
need to be in
C3
there.
requirements.
Right,
We
it may
have
not
to
be
do
there.
that.
Yeah. So I guess this is happening in a lot of cities that we've worked in where their checklist is really designed for small projects and big projects, and it doesn't quite work. And it's usually discretion of the planning board what we submit. And I don't know if this ordinance overrides that, if it still allows you to have that discretion, or do you need to push standardized?
Well, state law is going to override anything. So we're trying to bring the ordinance into conformance with state law, and part of the state law requirement was let's make it easier for applicants to understand what's really being required of them. So that's why they're asking for a timeline and submittal requirements. So we're trying to balance.
Okay, so it doesn't have to be cast, chiseled in stone, but just so they get them pretty close to where they need to be.
Yeah, yes, exactly.
Okay. Any other comments? So can we go through those comments that we just kind of, what did you write down the comments that we made? Ann, could you read them back to us?
So we're going to check the consistency between the two sections regarding childcare facilities, C5 and Table H2. Second, on Table H2, that was really more of a confirmation that the senior housing and the land donation had been removed because they were not applicable. Third, we will look at changing the language in points C1, C2, and C3 and other related sections, changing the language from no more than 35% to up to 35% density bonus. Fourth, amending the resolution to fix the typo that says to amending to amend. Looking at the language around the incentives and concessions in section D1A regarding architectural design elements to avoid design elements that are inconsistent with the city's guidelines for good materials and architectural design elements. And then lastly, looking again at the checklist to add requirements that should be standard for larger multifamily projects, including perspective views, stormwater requirements.
All right, that sounds good. Is that all?
Could you just clarify the part about the architectural design requirements that we discussed?
Well, I have two thoughts. One, we don't need to say anything, and we could let state law stand. I think the waivers in state density bonus law tend to be a little more straightforward, how people use them. The concessions that I've seen requested can be things like what you're talking about, where I've seen applications where they're actually different. The concession is to have different types of units for the affordable units that have different finishes, have different appliances. And I think that's some of what the concern might be about not having the same level of design. So I'm not sure whether that means we just stay silent and allow the review process with the commission and the council to weigh in on those things, or be more specific about what might qualify as a concession. I mean, you can see on that page where that D1A sits, we took out a lot of the language about concessions because it really muddied the waivers versus concessions, so we just opted to take it out altogether. And if the commission has a suggestion, I'm happy to hear it.
I'm curious if the other commissioners, how they feel about, I mean, somewhat, I think, like the approach of sort of just not saying it, but basically just crossing out the part of architectural design requirements.
So I guess I have mixed feelings about it because I think to the extent that the density bonus law and the more recent amendments in particular are intended to incentivize people to add more affordable units, I think I share the design concerns, but in general, I don't know. I think it's more important to build affordable units. So I'm more interested in opening the door to what counts as a concession or incentive. However, I think if we're silent about it, individual applicants can still make the case that a particular variation from standard architectural standards is a concession that they want, and if they make a case for it, then I think that could be part of the concession package. So I don't think that staying silent about it necessarily cuts off anyone's options. So I would be okay with taking it out.
Yeah, and I think that's the kind of approach that I'm thinking of, and I think the only other thing I would add is that in my mind, affordable housing doesn't have to necessarily be mutually exclusive with.
No,
And not
I
that
don't
you're
think
saying
so
it is,
either. I just think that to the extent we're talking about removing barriers and or kind of increasing the incentives for people to build it, I'm just generally in favor of that. But
That makes total sense, and I agree with that. I guess putting my little twist on is that I think developers and builders typically their first response is to change buildings in terms of zoning codes, in terms of massing, like height, size, because those have the biggest effect financially, and that unfortunately architectural elements also get value engineered when I would say they might not have as big of effect, like the change from vinyl windows to wood clad. And so if we can kind of force them to at least have the architectural aspects brought to us for review, I guess I would feel a little more okay about that, rather than giving them an opportunity to maybe sort of circumvent that review. And so I think we're kind of on the same page, basically, so I'll just shut up now. So I'd be in favor of removing that language, just that one little section of architectural design.
The whole A or just the first?
Just the part of architectural design requirements.
Yeah.
So we'd still keep in zoning code requirements, a modification of zoning code requirements.
It's a strange whole paragraph. I mean, reduction of site development standards.
It's more like a.
What standards do we have that
loosening.
we would give away? I mean, we don't have a lot of fluff in our standards. They're pretty practical. But, okay.
We have something forthcoming for the commission in June, just to kind of illustrate the point in terms of development standards. Is a project where they're potentially requesting a density bonus for one additional unit in exchange for waiving the setback requirement. So rather than having the standard setbacks, you get a modified building footprint that's a little bit denser, but you get one extra unit out of it. So that would be the type of.
Well, I can see there might be there could be cases for that. But I agree the architectural design requirement seems too broad a statement. You don't want a bunch of boxes being dropped in. And we know that we can do nicely designed affordable housing.
Yeah.
So
Yes,
why
true.
give them that, right?
Mhm.
Okay. So strike
So
that
we're
one.
going to strike that architectural design requirements.
That would be my
Yeah.
preference, yes.
Yes.
agree.
Okay, is that it?
That's it.
So, someone make a motion to,
I'll try. I'll make a motion. I'll make a motion to forward to City Council the proposed zoning code amendments to section 20.40.040 density bonus of the Albany Municipal Code with the minor revisions as discussed, which I guess for the record I should try to say them all, which includes the coordination or coordination of consistency for table H2, revisions to section C1, C2, C3, the title of the actual resolution proper, correction in that, and then also the revision to section D1 regarding the architectural design requirements, any elimination of that term, and anything else that,
The additions to the submittal checklist.
yes, and those two.
I'll second that motion.
all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Unanimous? Approval. Thank you. We've got to choose a naysayer here. We agree too much. So, moving down the agenda, item 7-4, study session for economic development strategic plan implementation. Recommendation for zoning ordinance revisions, streamline commercial development review, uses and development regulations. Jean, are you presenting that one?
Yes. So again, I'm Jean Eisberg, the contract planner for this item. So this is our second study session on zoning ordinance revisions related to the economic development strategic plan. Tonight, we're going to talk about use regulations. At the commission's suggestion, we're separating out parking, and we'll come back and have a separate study session on parking. So I'll just provide an overview of the project, a recap of what we discussed in March, the proposed revisions to the use regulations, and then talk about recommendations and next steps. So again, this is a study session, so no action tonight, just a discussion. So this economic development strategic plan was adopted in the fall. It has a range of policies and programs around retail and attracting desirable businesses into the city. And there was one key program that's the focus of our work here, which is about revising allowed uses, design review, and permit requirements, as well as parking ratios in the city's commercial districts to remove obstacles to commercial development. So our objectives are shown here, again, about streamlining the development review process, making sure we continue to encourage well-designed and desirable retail and restaurant uses in the city, and then tailoring these zoning revisions to the purposes of each of the districts. So when we spoke in March, the Commission generally supported opportunities for more streamlined review and approval process through changes to permit requirements, a clearer hierarchy of permitted uses across the 3 commercial districts, and updates to the use definitions to reflect more contemporary uses. Commissioners had some differences of opinion about whether or not the existing use permit requirements in the CMX were appropriate, whether personal service usage should be generally directed towards Solano and San Pablo, as well as some different ideas about ways to regulate parking, which again we'll come back to next month. So this staff report brings forward ideas for how to implement use regulations and some paths forward on the areas where there were some disagreement. So 4 key recommendations. First, updating the purpose statements in each district to reflect the recently updated general plan, the more contemporary uses, and the character of each of the areas, Solano, San Pablo, and the Cleveland Avenue frontage road areas. Second, adding use definitions for some of the common uses that the city sees and some more contemporary uses, including breweries, crafts, tutoring. Third, establishing a hierarchy for allowed uses in the 3 commercial districts, and then aligning the permit requirements with those districts as appropriate for the community's desires and the city's desires. And then lastly, as we're looking at allowing more uses by right or through a minor use permit process, looking at performance measures to make sure that There's compatibility between uses, protecting surrounding uses, particularly residential, from potential impacts due to noise, glare, odors, etc. So the first item, district purposes. Attachment 1 contains red lines for potential changes to the actual language in the code, but I've also put it on the screen here. So in the text box, this is new language from the general plan land use designation. So in the new general plan, there's no longer a light industrial district. The CMX district now corresponds to the commercial services and production land use designation. And this is a reflection of the changes in this area, that it's not about more traditional industrial manufacturing, but this broader range of uses, including maker activities, production, distribution, repair. And so the red lines, or excuse me, the underlined strikeouts shown on the screen here are trying to get at those changes. The CMX likewise includes a number of sort of sub-definitions, and we've cleaned this up to eliminate things that are really unrelated to the purpose of the district, and again, focus on the uses as intended by the general plan. In the San Pablo Commercial District, the definition is fairly well aligned in terms of what's bolded here, this idea of a citywide or larger market in a boulevard environment. However, the underlined portion shows an update based on the new land use designation in the general plan around encouraging redevelopment of underutilized parcels, envisioning this transformation into more of a pedestrian-oriented mixed-use environment on San Pablo. The purposes for the Solano district, we're not proposing any changes. Staff felt like the existing purpose statement matched the character of the district around adjacent retail that services that serve adjacent neighborhoods, surrounding communities, this idea of an attractive pedestrian-oriented shopping environment, as well as providing opportunities for higher density residential and office development. So next on the use definitions, last time we talked about the proliferation of tutoring. Staff's desire was to distinguish tutoring services, which are typically after school and located in storefronts, from schools, and also from service instructional, which is reserved for non-academic classes like art, music, and cooking. There is one error in the staff report, which is that the recommended tutoring definition should appear as it does on the screen and should not include artistic lessons. So rather, those would be classified as service instructional. So with each new use definition that we're showing in the staff report, we'd also need to add the relevant use category into the table in the code. And so here you see tutoring and lessons would be proposed as permitted uses on Solano and San Pablo, and would require a use permit in the CMX as you're thinking about, students traveling into that district, that we want to be more precise about any conditions applied there. One change to service instructional, they're currently permitted uses in Solano and San Pablo, but we're recommending instead of a major use permit in the CMX, a minor use permit. Next, were hybrid uses that we talked about in March. So this would be a commission recommendation to separate the idea of custom manufacturing from food and beverage production. So custom manufacturing, which would include custom crafts or using small tools to make things, and food and beverage production, as it sounds like, could be bakeries, coffee roasters, microbreweries. And so again, we've listed the recommended permit requirements within each district in the table below. So in terms of permits required, this recommendation seeks to establish more of a hierarchy between permitted and conditionally permitted uses within each district. And so these changes, again, are intended to align the permit requirements for each district with the character of that district. So sometimes that means that things are more permissive in the CMX district in the case of more auto-oriented uses, while in Solano that use may require a use permit, and then vice versa for uses that are more pedestrian-oriented, the retail, the restaurants, services that may be more appropriate on Solano or to some extent on San Pablo. So in the packet, in attachment 2 is the underlined strikeout of changes proposed for use permit requirements by use. Notably, these changes also suggest allowing more use permit actions at the director level as minor use permits. One note on beer and wine. So right now, the changes proposed to treat permit requirements for beer and wine versus full alcohol service the same, so allowing them by right in Solano and San Pablo, and a use permit in the CMX. And this is just for alcohol service in restaurants. Bars would still be required to get a major use permit. So one thing to note is that if we're changing a use permit requirement from a use permit to permitted by right, you no longer are required to make findings. And so right now, these are the types of findings that the city makes. And talking with staff, there was a sense that they're not necessarily making the project better, and so that we wouldn't be losing anything by eliminating them. However, at the same time, and this leads us to our next item, identifying performance measures where we may be missing opportunities to apply conditions that were previously applied during the use permit process. So looking at some of the recent use permits issued for typical types of uses, including gyms and health clubs and restaurants with alcohol service, we've come up with this list of performance measures that's in your packet and also on the screen here. So for gyms and health clubs, this would be regulating the hours of operations, requiring insulation or other means to meet noise standards, and then if an applicant wanted to operate outside of these hours, they would be required to come in for a major use permit. Likewise, for full alcohol service on the Solano corridor and in San Pablo, same thing, to regulate business hours, noise standards, and again, that an applicant would be required to come in for a use permit if they wanted to operate outside those hours.
Can I ask you a quick question? Sorry to interrupt you. So has that always been the standard operating hours for full alcohol service, the 8 to 11?
No. The code right now does not have hours for alcohol service. These are requirements that have been applied to projects recently that received use permits.
Okay. So if we, I was going to say, so if we wanted to, we could make a recommendation to amend the 8 to 11 to 8 to midnight or whatever. Okay.
I noticed in the staff report, and same up here, that there seems to not account for Friday. I assume it's supposed to be with Saturday, but
Yes.
it could go either way, so, okay, thanks.
Yes, thank you. Okay, so the last one on the new hybrid use definitions, custom manufacturing and food and beverage preparation. So again, if we think about these as hybrid uses, the commission discussed last time, sort of the trade-offs between the retail component and the manufacturing component. So this was, I think, an idea that was discussed here, that the retail area should comprise at least, and we've suggested the first 15 feet of the public street-facing depth. So basically, the front of the store would need to be retail sales, and then the remainder could be the custom manufacturing and the preparation element of the business. So again, tonight we are looking for your feedback. Again, we'll come back with parking either next month or in July, and then return with an ordinance for your consideration later this summer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions of staff?
No. I just
Already
have,
asked the question.
I just have some comments.
Comments?
Do you wanna- I have a fair number, so if you have.
Okay, well, I guess mine kind of falls under one category. I guess when I was looking at the matrix with the various uses, whether they be the public, quasi-public, or commercial, and their categories for permitted or use permitted in the various sections, I guess my one sort of, agenda is that I know affordable housing is a big issue and alternative housing is a big issue, not only in Albany, but in the Bay. And it seems like there's a kind of a missed opportunity to include under even like a use permit, so they would have to come and have it reviewed before us. But it seems like there's a missed opportunity by not allowing some of the housing aspects in the CMX area. I mean, most likely it probably won't happen, but I think at least allowing somebody the opportunity to present it and have us review it, I think would be a good start to possibly a possibility for more housing. And so I just went through the list, and so there's some like multifamily dwelling isn't allowed in the CMX, neither is transitional housing, supportive housing, community assembly, homeless shelters, or single residency hotels. And so, I don't know, I guess my thought would be to allow those in the CMX district with a use permit, so we have to review it. Might be something that could possibly start to try to address the housing issue. That if somebody ever wanted to build some, transitional housing, they could do it there if they got the property and we approved it. And it's kind of an area where I think it might be less prone to NIMBYism because it is kind of isolated from the other parts of the city. But yeah, at the same time, there's a lot of real estate there, a lot of parking spaces that the developer were to buy it and wanted to build something, they probably could put in a lot of units. So that's my one kind of issue.
I just think it's a good point. I think I've seen some of those in Oakland where it's transitional, and part of the transitional, I think one of them in particular is a prison reform. And they teach them a craft. So they live there and they learn the craft.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty cool program.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
and that, I guess, in conjunction with if we, somebody has a maker space there or some other type of new businesses that they could integrate with that, I think would be a great sort of opportunity.
So just one point on that. Live work is allowed within the CMX, the use permit. I think it's totally at the commission's discretion, but I think kind of big picture, all the industrial uses are isolated there so that there is no conflict with residential uses. Many years ago, there was a document that was prepared that kind of, our tax base obviously here is quite limited, and so there is, in that area, some of our, tax-generating businesses are located there, so that would be one other thing to consider.
Which I think is a great point. And that kind of popped in my head when we talked about how I think one of the changes we're considering is having tutoring facilities there. And so I'm just thinking of the juxtaposition of having a tutoring facility next to the rock and soil, business. It also, I wouldn't say jives really well together. So if we're going to allow opportunities for that, why not open it up to an issue that seems to be sort of plaguing the whole Bay Area?
So I'm intrigued by this idea, and I think it's something that's worth exploring. I think it might be a different exercise than at least what, Jean has been tasked with, which is expanding opportunities for commercial. So that's not at all to discount what you're saying, because I really do think it's a good point, but it's something that probably takes a lot of analysis too, and I'm not sure that I feel ready to pull that part of it into this discussion, but I'm all in favor of looking at it more in the future.
I don't know if this is the opportunity where we could ask that of you, or if you think that's sort of beyond the purview of what we're doing. I don't know, because we're still in the kind of study session,
Yeah.
so.
It's certainly something we can discuss. As it relates to economic development implementation, it's not part of that. But,
True.
being that we are looking at the code, this would also be a time where we could potentially amend it to address that.
Mm-hmm.
But I do hear you, and I think obviously it is a very touchy subject, and I think obviously should have more sort of analysis to it rather than just sort of a off-the-cuff
Right.
change, but.
So our tax, you brought up about our tax base. It's all only on retail, right? There's no tax generated on service, like a tutoring.
No, there's no tax, I don't think, from a tutoring service or even personal
It's only on the
services.
retail or, yeah, food service.
I mean, you could, well, like you said, I'm just kind of spitballing here, but you could look at it the aspect of if somebody did have transitional housing or any kind of affordable housing there, that they could do a mixed use, and so the ground floor could be retail, and then you could have affordable housing above, and so in that way we still are trying to maximize our tax base by getting retail sales tax from that. So it doesn't necessarily have to exclude it.
Yeah, right.
I know, but yeah, it's kind of a big, kind of opening up the
I
whole
just am concerned
word.
about mission creep, I guess.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't want the current task to get derailed.
Yeah.
But I'm totally
Yeah, no,
behind
yeah,
the
and
idea.
maybe this is something that I mean, I'm assuming we can, if we wanted to, put it on our agenda as a thing to sort of discuss later on and review whenever we want to, if we wanted.
Yeah, I mean, I think it could potentially be a different discussion, but yeah, that is something that we could come back to you for more expansive conversation.
With regards to this, Commissioner Wadi?
Oh, yeah, so I had a handful of comments. I'll just start at the beginning. So first of all, thank you. I think this is a great set of revisions that definitely included a ton of the comments and feedback. And most of my comments at this point are relatively small, but I just want to hit on them, make sure I didn't miss anything. On zoning table 1, and this isn't something that's been revised, but again, I do feel like it's somewhat relevant to what we're talking about here. Under the land use, building materials, sales and service, subsection B, open storage areas, it looks like the use permit on San Pablo, I guess, was a little bit of a concern to me. I'm not sure if an open storage area is something that, again, if we're rethinking what sort of the purpose is of San Pablo, if we really want sort of open air yards on San Pablo rather than in this CMX district. So I would be supportive of either of turning that into a non-permitted land use in the San Pablo area, again, kind of keeping with the intent of that district. Moving down to, on the same table, offices, general and professional. Right now, it's listed as permitted in both the Solano and San Pablo districts. And I would be supportive of requiring either a use permit or a minor use permit, at least on the ground floor on the Solano corridor for offices. And again, I don't know if I'm in the minority here or not, but I do have some general concerns about sort of proliferation of professional offices on Solano on the ground floor. And I saw elsewhere there was a little subnote that did discourage certain other types of uses on the ground floor, specifically on Solano, but I didn't catch that, at least for this this line item in the zoning table. Let's see, I think that was it on the zoning table. And then in the staff report, or I guess just the general policy recommendations, let's see, let me start at the, so on the definition of food and beverage preparation, the only comment I had is similar, so in the custom manufacturing definition, it includes a clause that allows for the incidental direct sale to consumers of goods produced on site. And I would be supportive of including that same language under the food and beverage preparation, just so that it's clear that if they're making food, they can also sell food on site and have it be considered sort of an ancillary or accessory use, just in case there's some conflict with, I don't know, I guess we're changing it to allow for food service, so maybe that's why I was excluded, but I think to make it clear that there's no issue there. That would be one of my recommendations. And then on the performance standards, my one, at least, edit that I would have was on the hours of operation for gyms that are added there. The 8 p.m., as a commuter from San Francisco every day, the 8 p.m. closure time still seems a little tight. If you figure most workout classes are an hour to an hour and a half, and then there's usually a half hour of sort of close down time. When you start working backwards and you have a commute, it makes it kind of hard to actually get a workout in after work. And so I would encourage that to either be extended to either 9 p.m. or 10 p.m. Just gives a little bit more flexibility. I understand the sort of the concern about people not being too loud too late, but 8 p.m. seems just a little on the early side from my perspective. I wasn't going to comment on the hours of operation for the restaurants with alcohol, but I would certainly also be supportive of inching those up a little bit if there's consensus on the commission as well. So I think, and one last thing, two last things, sorry. On the custom manufacturing operational conditions, I would just want to make sure the provision about the first 15 feet being retail, that we're just clear that on corner lots, it's not intended to have to necessarily wrap the whole length of the side street, that I'm sure the intent is sort of facing the commercial corridor. So just to make sure that's clear. And then I know we brought this up a little bit last time, but I wasn't sure what the staff position was on the issue of sort of chain stores and how those are handled specifically on Solano is of, I think, most concern to me. I wasn't sure if that was captured. I know there was some discussion about sort of regional retail vice more localized, but I guess that would be more of a question. Just, is that something we were just choosing not to deal with at this time, or if it's already sort of incorporated in the code through some other mechanisms?
We don't have any specific language that restricts or requires additional permitting for a chain or a franchise. That's something we could look at. What's interesting is that most businesses that come here tend to be local.
Yeah.
So we haven't had too much of an issue with national companies coming in and locating on Solano.
I guess the only reason that it comes up for me is since we are making it easier for especially food and beverage and retail to come in without having to go through a whole lot more process, that I wouldn't want there to be an unintended consequence of us losing those local businesses, having that sort of easier path to open and having sort of the market skew towards sort of chain stores that can pay a higher rent and that sort of thing. So I would be supportive of us looking at some sort of language that maybe requires either a minor use permit or a major use permit for chains across the board.
And just for my own knowledge, I think in San Francisco it's defined as like a company that has 10 or more fixed locations. Is that
Yeah, 11 or more.
11
Yeah.
or more, okay.
You have CVS, right? You have a few on that. Orange.
Yeah, like the Supercuts and the 7-Eleven, yeah.
And was that related to a district or citywide?
For me, at least, Solano is the most critical. I don't have as big of a concern about chains being located on San Pablo or in the CMX district, but I think Solano is sort of our really unique, special commercial corridor that I would hate to see overrun with chains on every other storefront.
I would support those comments. I guess one question I have for you, and for you or staff, for the gym hours, was that district specific, or was that for the citywide in terms of the 8 p.m.?
This was regardless of location or district.
Okay. And I mean, the only thing I'll just throw out there is I know we had the whole Orange Fitness. I don't know if you were here for that.
No.
Where basically I'm just thinking kind of, again, differentiating for Solano Avenue versus CMX and San Pablo Avenue, just because Solano Avenue could have some locations where the gym is directly adjacent to residential areas. And so I would be fine with extending the hours for for the San Pablo Avenue, the CMX, and then maybe for, I don't know, and maybe have use permit minor for the Solano Avenue. But I totally agree with your point, and I was thinking that earlier. Like, I work till 7 or later, and so I need a gym class that's late at night that I could go to, and 8 won't really cut it. So.
Yeah, and the only time I ever go to the gym is between 8 and 9 p.m. because 9 is when it closes, so why closes. But yeah, I had the same
But we
comment.
could distinguish, if you want, between hours on Solano versus hours on San Pablo, and then when a use permit gets triggered beyond 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock or whatever. Decide.
That would be my preference.
Oh, I had a couple of little things. That was one of them. On custom manufacturing, I wanted to clarify if this is intended to allow for things like 3D printing, or, I have like this friend who goes to the city and uses some crazy electronic jewelry making machine at some, I don't know, some like maker space. I assume that kind of stuff is supposed to be allowed within this district, but the reference to hand tools or small mechanical equipment gave it this very like steampunk vibe that I wanted, which is cool, but I wanted to see, what's intended there and what kind of equipment is encompassed within that.
Yeah, I mean, part of the thinking, if it's equipment that requires ventilation or generators or things that are going to produce noise, odor, or toxins, then that wouldn't
And that wouldn't be in there.
So if the 3D printer is just in its unit, as a lot of the small 3D printers are, then that would be fine. But if we're talking about a dust collection system for the CNC router or whatever it is, that may not be appropriate here, depending on the size and scale.
Okay. Yeah, I maybe give some consideration to clarifying that it could also be electronic equipment that does not generate, air or noise or odor emissions, something like that. And then I thought overall I liked the hierarchy and the differentiation of uses across districts. One, I guess I'm just not sure, and forgive me for not looking at the definitions, but what is community retail as compared to neighborhood retail? And what's the rationale for having, for example, in the Solano district, having neighborhood be permitted and community retail being minor use permit?
Yeah, that was kind of my question about what does that mean?
Yeah.
I'm just going to look this up.
Well, and while they're looking for that, on the gyms and health clubs, I would also be sort of open to having having different permitted open hours on Solano versus San Pablo. But I did want to note that the way it's currently proposed is to have a minor use permit on Solano in any case, and have it be permitted on San Pablo. So, at least the minor use permit probably provides some opportunity, but I understand. If we're saying there are these hours that apply across the board, then it's hard to know if you really have discretion to say no to it.
No, that makes sense. So in essence, the revision right now would be to make the, which section am I looking at? The Solano more of an administrative review versus San Pablo is just
Right.
permitted by right.
Right.
But you could decide
on-
something different. That was our suggestion.
Right.
But if you wanted Solano to be permitted as well, I mean, our thinking was kind of this issue with the abutting residential and the concerns you had about Orange Theory, but
And the
happy to entertain other ideas.
the minor use permit, I mean, that in essence is, correct me if I'm wrong, is like a ministerial
Well,
staff level
no,
review? Or it's-
and it's not ministerial. It is, and the minor use permit is noticed.
Oh, yeah, minor use
And
permit,
there
we
is a-
do a 300-foot mailer and do a
Okay.
hearing on a
There's
staff level.
a hearing at a staff level. It tends to be out here, but it is noticed and there is a hearing.
Okay.
It's clearly much more informal.
So to go back to Commissioner Jennings' question regarding neighborhood retail versus community retail, neighborhood retail is defined as a classification which includes retail services primarily oriented towards surrounding neighborhoods. It includes, but is not limited to, apparel stores, drugstores and pharmacies, dry goods stores, florists, and jewelry stores. Community retail includes an orientation towards a citywide customer base. It includes, but is not limited to, department stores, automotive parts sales, large appliance sales, office supplies and equipment sales, and furniture sales.
Okay.
Clear as mud.
I mean, yeah, that gives a sense of the different kinds of categories that's going for, so
And like
with
the
that,
the footprints of those.
Right,
businesses.
right. okay. Well, I'm okay with that, as is.
So on clarification though, with the standard hours then, would those standard hours be sort of the first pass that would typically be applied, whether it's permitted or requiring a ministerial or a minor use permit? So those hours would stick unless on a case-by-case they were to be amended? Is that kind of the idea? Okay. I mean, if that's, I don't know in that situation then whether it's better to go a little longer to cover the principally permitted locations, knowing that they can be reduced through the hearing process if people have specific concerns on Solano. So like, should we start with till 10 p.m. so that on San Pablo you could have a gym open till 10, and then when you have to do your minor use permit on Solano, if there are concerns about 10 p.m., it could be reduced to 8 on a case-by-case, rather than San Pablo being constrained to an 8 p.m. and they don't have a hearing option to extend those hours easily.
But it might be somebody that is thinking of investing might come in with the assumption they can stay open to 10, and if all of a sudden community output or something, we're cutting it back to 9, it might be might not pan out for them financially. So
Would you rather have different hours listed for the different
They
districts?
come and ask for the extension rather than they come, if you go to 9 and they want to go to 10, they come and ask for it and granted. Would that be a better way to go? Because that way they're not giving a false sense of successful business, and then it's yanked out and they've wasted all that effort. It's like a bigger conflict. Better to give than to take.
It's true.
What do you think?
Yeah,
Or is it just discouraged people right off the bat? They see the 9 and they say, oh, we want elsewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess there is the aspect, I'm just thinking, I get where you're coming from in the aspect that if it's on Solano Avenue, they know that it's going to have to come before us and be reviewed. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, at the same time,
Because 9 does seem early, but there are, if you're around the corner and you're still within the R3, or the R3, but the commercial district, you're right next, right up against residential, right there. So right now we're going to 9, is that it, Solano? You thinking about extending?
Or, right now, we've looked at it on a case-by-case basis.
Case by case, right?
Yeah.
and in general, I think I think one of the slides showed language that would specifically say 8 p.m. is the
Our proposal
Sunday
was.
through Thursday.
Sorry, you're talking about for the alcohol?
I'm sorry, I'm
The
thinking for
gyms.
gyms.
So for the gyms, the hours of operation proposed were 6 a.m. to 8 p.m. And then extension beyond those hours would be subject to a major use permit. So regardless of what district you were in, same hours, you'd come in for a use permit if you wanted to go till 9 or 10.
What would folks think about if we broke it down then by district and said on Solano, keep it as proposed to the 8 p.m. closure, and on San Pablo and CMX allowed it till 10 p.m.?
I would be fine with that.
I'd be fine with that.
I'd be fine. I'd be okay with extending the 8 to 9, actually.
Yeah, I would be, like, I feel like I could argue it either extended in both to 9, but keep the different level of review, or break it down by hours. I don't have a strong feeling.
Okay,
one
I
way
don't
or the
really
other.
either, yeah.
Did-
But
Did you say
I do think that
the,
8 across the board is a little early.
you said the Y closes at 9?
It does,
The 9, yeah.
yeah. On weeknights, or, well, so on Monday through Thursday, it closes at 9, and then on weekends, it closes earlier. So it's kind of the opposite of a bar.
Yeah, I mean, right now I don't have a preference either one. I guess I'd have to think about it a little more, but
Be
Yeah, but I
fine
think the
deferring
general
to
idea-
staff with that sort of
Yeah.
general direction to think it through a little.
So this seems like I was brought up with the chain stores and the office building, different, it seems like a fine chemistry, it's like a very complex equation. And so I'm wondering if you've gotten any clues from other communities that do have similar retail strips that you're kind of modeling it after, and if you can let us know what those strips are, because if we don't do it right, and there's some more unforeseen opportunity here for people we didn't, businesses we didn't really see moving in and kind of changing, like I'm thinking cases like, I think Pasadena had an issue where all of a sudden it's just overwhelmed with bars and clubs because of some changes, and they're just a big boom and then a bust and just collapsing. And I don't see us running to that, but something like that could happen,
yeah.
So Jeannie's also writing code for Palo Alto
Oh,
and University Avenue.
let's model after Palo Alto.
Yeah.
More maker
I
spaces.
don't think you want that
Doesn't
to
work.
be your model.
Okay, good. Maybe not.
Well, I'm not sure that anything that we're doing is going to open the floodgates, but someone brought up earlier this point, will they go to El Cerrito versus coming here? And that could be a factor. I mean, if we're changing things to permitted where they're previously required a use permit, it's taking potentially a few months off the timing that it takes to get up and running. And that's particularly useful for the more of the local businesses versus the chain stores that can bear a few months of process. I mean, I don't know if this is going to be perfect, and you may want to go in and amend things. It's hard for me to imagine that we're going to open the floodgates on things. What's the city's? The city's seeing a lot of several breweries. That's been a
Yeah, we've had
popular use.
breweries, local restaurants, some specialty retail, particularly with Oaktown Spice recently opening.
I mean,
Yeah.
Services and the restaurants
Yeah.
are probably what you're going to continue to see.
yeah, I mean,
It's
the
not
way you
gonna be-
described it there looks really exciting. That would be great if that moved in. I'm just wondering, all of a sudden it's all tutorials. Maybe that's good, I don't know, but
It'll be overrun with steampunks.
That's a good point. I mean, if, we're trying to add a definition for tutoring, but if it's not something you want to see a lot of, then maybe you want it to be a use permit process. It's sending a signal that, yes, that we're making this process easy for you because we want this retail sales, but, this process is going to be more challenging because that's not really what we want here.
I mean, I guess I like the notion that if we do find there's some unintended consequences that are negative unintended consequences, we can always amend the code.
I guess the market would adjust itself, right? I mean, you're not going to have tons of tutorials, you just won't have enough students to fill
Right,
it.
true. The city of Berkeley is undergoing some changes in their commercial districts, so the council just made a referral, so the planning commission's looking at some of the same things that Albany's looking at around, particularly around parking and what happens when you change a use. So I will bring those up when we come back and talk about parking, because I know we sort of talked about what's happening on San Pablo and Solano in Berkeley as well. Yeah.
Okay, thanks. Well, it all sounds great, actually. Any more comments?
Okay, that's great. Thanks for all your work on this.
Yeah, this
Yes,
is great.
thank you.
That brings us to a close. I've lost my sheet. I think that's the last item.
Just, yeah.
Announcements? Oh,
Yeah, right here.
business then? Okay.
The only announcement, just another reminder, we have Solano Complete Streets Workshop next Wednesday at the Community Center, so you're welcome to attend. It kicks off with a corridor walk from Flowerland at 5 p.m., and then we're back at the community center at 6.
Thank you for reminding me. So, given that, that concludes the meeting. Thank you all.
Thank you.